Well, welcome to Run, Walk, Talk, Tales of Inclusion and Development. I'm Judy and my pronouns are she and her. And I'm here with Steph and her pronouns are she and her. And today we're going to be talking about power. And we each read a book on power to frame our discussion. And so let's get to it. Steph, why don't we each start by sharing the book we read and our definition of power? So, what book did you read and how are you defining power?
Yeah, so I read Power for All, How It Really Works and Why It's Everyone's Business by Julie Batiliana and Tiziana Caserio, right here. And really, the book goes in and talks about sort of the myths around power and how power has been studied and misunderstood, and various sort of social movements. A really fantastic book. And one of the ways that I define power is that ability or influence to, for behavior over others. And I
Mm-hmm.
think I almost, before reading this book, thought more of a, leader or manager over employees or a parent over child, like, so this power over. And this book has really kind of expanded my idea around what power looks like, and maybe it's not such a dirty word. What about you,
Mm-hmm.
Judy?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I read, yeah, similar experience to you, in that I read The Power Code by Katty Kay and Claire Shipman. And they argue in this book really that the traditional notions of power are outdated
Mm,
and that, traditional notions of power, that sort of power over that you mentioned, they're just not working for society in general and particularly for women. And so in this book, they're really advocating for a new way of thinking about power that is inclusive and joyful and
mm,
purposeful,
mm-hmm.
versus one driven by ego. And so if I were to define power, my definition is similar to yours, in that it's having influence on others,
Yeah.
and then also having agency, or autonomy over oneself as well.
Yeah, that's great. So tell me a little bit more. Does the book go into and talking about how do different genders look at power?
So it absolutely does. And I mean, in the power code, it's looking at power primarily as it relates to two genders. So it's really
Mm,
looking at women and men.
mm,
And the authors acknowledge this right at the very beginning of the book. And they
yeah.
also acknowledge that they are, two white women writing from, in
Yeah.
part, their lived experience.
Good.
Yeah, and they're really aiming to explore power through a diverse lens. And so, to
Hmm.
do that, they do include interviews with a diverse group of women, who hold various powerful positions, be it in government or, in kind of corporations. And they also turn to academic research as well. And so, as you were noting, they say that very traditionally, and it's interesting, they quote a sociologist, Max Weber, going back to 1922, who defined
Wow.
power as the ability to exercise one's will over others.
Yeah.
And they're really saying that, 1922 and today's definition, it hasn't really changed much. And they're saying and arguing in their book that for women, and of course, there's exceptions to this, but they're saying that for women in general, it's often more about power to instead of having power over.
Yeah.
And that means it's more about having influence and, building relationships. And that for women, if we perceive this power over, that's not typically what we're after. And that may be why that
Mm-hmm.
we're like, no, I don't want to step up for a leadership position. That's
Mm-hmm.
that's not what if
Mm-hmm.
that's what power is, that's
Mm-hmm.
not what I'm after. And so
Mm-hmm.
they really argue for reframing power so that it's inclusive, so that it has impact, so that it's, a tool for the greater good.
Right.
And they also talk about power as not being finite. And so it's really this
Mm.
shift from it being, win-lose situation to a
Mm-hmm.
win-win view of power. So I found that was really fascinating. And I think it leads really nicely, Steph, into my question for you, which
Mm-hmm.
is in your book, how does it address power as the zero-sum game? And does it think that power in the book, that you read, does it think it can be expanded to fit everybody?
Yeah. Yeah, it definitely does. And I think, you know, it also, I think, addresses, you know, different cultures when we're talking about power and thinking about power. And I mean, even for me, when I think about kind of my years of experience in the workplace, that, you know, if you've had some of those leaders who are very much a sort of a top down, I have all the
Hmm.
power, you are the doers. Um, the impact and the level of productivity and innovation that you get out of a team compared to the leader that, you know, shares their power, empowers their team
Hmm.
to kind of step up and sort of share that the amount of kind of innovation, productivity, joy that you talk about, and all these things really kind of, you know, they're highlighted and people actually really enjoy their work. So, I mean, I think it's pretty much like your book was saying, a zero sum game is a bit of a old school way of thinking. I will also say this book, you know, right in the beginning talks about that, you know, power doesn't have to be a dirty word, you know.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Yeah. No,
What about
absolutely.
you?
Well, yeah, I mean, in thinking about power as a zero sum game and thinking about it, it doesn't have to be a dirty word. And I think that's why they're advocating for let's change the framework and
Mhm.
definition of power from this situation where one person's winning and the other person's losing, and thinking to power more of a way to achieve collective success. And as you say, that boss who, reaches out and makes sure that everybody is contributing, and that's really what this book touches on as well, this changing power from being hierarchical power to one that's more communal. And again, this power to versus a power over.
Yeah.
Uh, and they also write about how women, face often expectations that conflict with traditional notions of power. So
Hmm.
the authors are really calling for a reimagined understanding, if you will, of power that can align to women's strengths and values. And
Hmm.
again, they're generalizing, but they're saying that,
Sure.
often for women, that includes ensuring that we've got personal power and developing things like self awareness and
Mhm.
confidence and authenticity. And as you said, like the joy piece of it, really saying that joy should be a central component of power.
Mhm.
And they're suggesting that if we can do that, that can bring potentially a balance so that there's not as much dissatisfaction and burnout when women do get
Mhm.
into leadership positions. And I also love that they talk about the importance of minimizing ego and
Oh,
how ego can obstruct effective use of power. And
yeah.
so, really thinking of, and I know, when you think of leaders that have impacted, I know for myself and for you, it's really people leading from humility and empathy. And
Yeah.
again, that collective good over personal gain. And I think that, I've experienced in the workplace sometimes where like now I'm kind of like, like certain things that have happened in reading this
Yes.
book. I'm like, okay, that makes sense. Cause the person really, it was that win or lose. We couldn't both win
Right.
in a situation. And so it's given me some insight into some situations, and some thinking that, oh, okay, maybe it was there was a struggle for power that I didn't realize, because I just thought
Right.
we can both win, we can
Right.
both come away from this in a win-win, and we can collectively work together.
Interesting. Yeah.
Hmm. Hmm. So, Steph, in the context of social movements like Black Lives Matter, and thinking about power,
Hmm.
does the book touch on why some of those movements may be successful or not successful because of power in society
Yeah.
and systemically?
Yeah. This for me was probably, this chapter was really fascinating because they looked at various social movements, and broke them down into sort of, there were kind of three things. They talk about agitators, innovators, and
Hmm.
orchestrators. to really create that social movement. And the example that in the book, they've had a few examples, but they talk about the Occupy Wall Street movement,
Mm-hmm.
which for anyone listening was the result of this public distrust in private sector, after kind of the aftermath of the Great Recession in the US, so in 2011. And they said, in a way, actually, the Occupy Wall Street movement succeeded to agitate. So they had the agitation piece to get sort of the people kind of,
Paying
they were
attention.
upset, paying
Yes.
attention, right?
Yeah.
Inequity, income disparity, all of these things, but it missed the innovation and orchestration. And so the innovators, just to let you know, creates the actionable solutions to address grievances identified by the agitators, right? And then the orchestrators are defined as the pollinators of social movement, that they coordinate across diverse parties to sort of put in place the changes that allow the solution to be adopted at scale. The example they do use, and I'm not sure if you've ever heard of the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board. So in the sustainability world, there's this sort of standards. And this woman by the name of Jean Rogers, who was an environmental engineer by training, wanted to know if there was a way for companies to consistently and transparently report on more than just financial performance. And so she did all of this research, creating this white paper, and started this nonprofit, which today is like, it's an industry standard and across like 77 kind of industries. So I want you to read the book, so I don't want to get into all of the details, but this was a really interesting chapter on breaking down social movements and why some were sort of successful and why some weren't.
Well, and it sounds like the relationship, because I think it was the last element that you mentioned is really that piece where the orchestrators, they're really doing that relationship building piece that is very powerful. And they're not exerting power over, they're really working to have that influence and build the relationships and build trust.
Yeah. And it's fascinating how you need, I think, all three.
Right.
To work together at different times, right? To keep the movement going.
Absolutely. Oh, that's interesting. That's fascinating.
So Judy, let's talk about decision-making and power. How does power influence decision-making processes at the individual, organizational, and societal levels?
So in this book, one of my favorite research studies that they reference, and they reference a number of them, comes from Berkeley. And in the Berkeley study, they actually had participants, they divided them into teams of 3, and they chose a leader for each of the teams at random. So 3 people, 1 leader, and each team was to work on a problem-solving task together. And then partway through the task, they brought in a plate of 4 cookies. Okay. And they basically said, okay, decide amongst yourselves, who gets the cookies. And of course, no surprise, right? Like people were polite and, each one of the 3 took a cookie. But then what they found consistently, time and again, was the randomly assigned leader, they took the 4th cookie. Wow. And not only did they take the 4th cookie, but they described it as the person that randomly chosen leader ate it with gusto. They really enjoyed that cookie. And
wow.
I mean, I love the research, right? And it's interesting because they talk about it as being that individual with power, randomly assigned reader, feels entitled, feels that they have this power to be more confident and make a decision on their own without consultation. So I think the important thing too is they didn't ask the others, do you mind if I have this 4th cookie? They took it. And so, in thinking about that, and thinking about the impact that it has, individually and on an organization and society, here's this individual with power who's feeling that they can make a decision, on their own that impacts an organization and impacts society, right? And really the book talks about how it's making that decision without, consultation or collaboration. And then what's also interesting is with respect to that study, they say that there's further research that shows that there's this inverse relationship between power and empathy. And so
Mm.
people in power can often be focused on their own goals, which can lead them
Mhm.
to overlook others' perspectives.
Mhm.
They may be
Mhm.
feeling less dependent on others for well being, which can lead to paying less attention to others' feelings. And
Mhm.
so it
Mhm.
really comes down to, with power, you may be out of touch with what others are feeling and doing, have an overconfidence in yourself for decision
Yeah,
making, and then you're creating social distance between you and others. And so basically, we see this in organizations where you're making decisions without consulting
that's
those
right.
the decision will affect. And so
Yeah.
again, really the book's advocating, like, let's have this inclusive leadership where we're really taking time to ask people, would you
Mhm.
like that fourth cookie? Like, how do you have,
You
right? I mean,
know,
it's,
I do like, I'm very
I
glad it's
was,
the cookie example.
I
I'm
thought
I'm
of
like,
you when I pulled
thank
that.
you.
It's with your
Yeah, yeah,
baking. Yep.
yeah.
100%,
Love that.
100%.
Yeah,
And
wow.
then, society overall, that, again, it's going to be impacted because those who are, making the policies, those
Mhm.
responsible for governance, are they prioritizing issues that only they see,
That's right.
and not, again, from listening to others.
Yeah.
So Steph, this leads nicely into a question for you. There's this idea too that power is only for senior leaders in the
Yeah.
organization. And even though, I mean, in light of that example that I just provided, people do have their own agency to different extent.
Mhm.
So, can you share in an organization, when may people besides senior leaders um, be able to exert power within an organization? What examples have you seen, or what did you read about in this book?
Yeah. Yeah. Um, so I will say, um, the one thing that I noticed in this book was a really great example of how a manager he came into an organization to sort of reorganize an audit department. It was an aircraft engineering manufacturing company. The issue or problem that the company was having, or this division, was that it was taking 28% longer to process audits than their peers.
Mm,
And so this person comes in, they've done this before, and they make some changes and tweaks to processes and things. And then the team sort of went ahead and said, okay, no problem, we'll implement this. And then this person, probably about a month later, after these changes have been implemented, they are actually taking longer than 28%. So it's actually, the performance is actually worse. And so what this manager realized was, I need to go and ask everyone this sort of really important question as to, like, when things go wrong, who
hmm
in the company do you go and talk to and look for answers?
hmm
And they found out it was this woman, Nancy. And so here was this woman, Nancy, who was an individual contributor, been with the organization for a long time,
hmm
had a lot of power
hmm
because she knew how to get things done. And it really
hmm
reminded me of in the organizations that I've worked with, it doesn't matter the title. They may have the knowledge because they've been there for a long time. And so I really think we can't underestimate the power that people have when they have that institutional knowledge. You know,
Absolutely, absolutely,
yeah,
and you know what? And as well, they implemented a solution that had worked in one organization, or that had been proven to
that's right.
work. He should have spoken to Nancy first.
Yeah, you totally. Well, I feel like if you would have talked to Nancy at the
Only,
beginning,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah. But I love it because
yeah,
it also, again, it goes to that piece of, like, let's talk to people and find out their perspectives on a solution before just going ahead, and he could have saved himself some time.
that's right, that's right.
Mhm, mhm,
Yeah,
mhm.
yeah,
Well, so yeah, I think we're both recommending our books for, and they look at power in different ways. And
Yeah.
so I haven't yet read the book that you've recommended, Steph, and I'm going to. In fact, perhaps we can just trade books with each
I think
other. I
I
think that's
think that's
our best
that's
bet.
our action. I think that
That's
might
our
be our
action. I
action
know.
already. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, it was an interesting discussion. Thank you. And so thank you for joining us, everybody. And until next time.